Jedi.
Master!
Stay back.
Man, imagine if they hadn't been forced to kill this character off. It could have been so cool. One of the really unfortunate things about writing a prequel is you tend to have to cut some character arcs short in order to preserve the original story, and Savage is a really unfortunate example of this. But he was such a good character that he made quite an impression even in the limited amount of time he was allowed to live.
Return to Sereno immediately. Very well, my lord.
I think it's understated just how much of a what-if Savage actually is. He's introduced as a victim of the Night Sisters' plot against Dooku, and while that's certainly cool, it took only a few episodes for him to outgrow that role. Savage is shaped into a monster very artificially, with a definite Frankenstein's monster quality to him, and that careless manipulation ultimately isn't enough to hold him under the control of any of his theoretical masters, which allows him to expand from a good single-arc villain into something much greater. As Savage's initial arc ends, he's told he has a brother, and the familiar face of the extremely, definitely, totally dead Maul floats on screen in the glass. This was such an unbelievably risky thing to pull off, and as someone that wasn't actively watching the show as it came out, I really did laugh it off initially. But the way they expanded on the characters in the universe as a whole while bringing Maul back to life worked so well that it's seriously hard to complain about. An audience will suspend disbelief if they see the narrative value a risky decision brings to the story, and unfortunately Maul didn't have a lot of narrative value in Phantom Menace. Sure, he was cool, but he was the definition of a one-dimensional action figure selling villain, so it was clear the character needed to change in some major way for this to pay off. Not only were they bringing Maul back, but they were reinventing him, reforging him into something more complete than the half-baked action figure we saw in Phantom Menace. Savage finds Maul completely broken down on a junk planet, cast away with the rest of the trash, living as little more than an animal. Just as both the audience and Savage himself begin to think that Maul is beyond saving, Maul remembers what got him in this situation.
Brother, what are you saying? Through the filth, through the grief, Jedi! Revenge. I must have revenge.
In that moment, the desire for revenge returns, and so does a piece of Maul's former self, however momentarily. I really do have to give credit to Sam Witwer for his voice acting ability, because in that single moment you get the full sense of just how big of a deal Maul really is. When Savage takes Maul back to Mother Talzin, she reforges his legs from battle droid parts, and as much as I hate the Night Sisters, I like that there's this literal reforging going on to match the figurative reforging the character is going through.
Brother.
As Maul wakes up, there's this critical moment where he accepts Savage as a brother, cementing them as a team, a unit. With that established, the Sith brothers swiftly grab the Jedi's attention, beginning a campaign of terror through the Outer Rim in an attempt to draw out Kenobi. This fixation on Kenobi is the strongest narrative tie to the Phantom Menace that Maul has, and maintaining that tie is crucial to maintaining the fact that despite Maul's reforging, he is in fact still the same character we've seen before. Shortly after this, there's this sort of tragic scene between the two brothers where they fight for dominance. Savage, raised as an ordinary Night Brother, feels that the brothers should be equal, but this is the scene where ultimately we see that Maul has been irreversibly damaged by his time as Palpatine's apprentice, as he defeats his brother and enforces the rule of two.
And an apprentice, and you are the apprentice. So, It is time for a lesson.
Despite this, Maul elects to forego the violent punishment Sith typically exact on their apprentices, instead helping his apprentice up and offering to complete his training and make him more powerful. This is a really interesting dynamic and an interesting balance that we see for the rest of Maul's life. His childhood as a Sith has left him permanently damaged and unable to be properly redeemed, but he holds no fondness for the Sith Master that abandoned him, and occasionally he does show glimmers of decency in between committing completely unspeakable crimes. While he's less redeemable than some other villains we see, he shares the common thread of victimhood in all of Palpatine's apprentices, and we're left as an audience sympathizing with Maul to a really startling degree.
The Clone Wars. Ah, yes. So it began without me.
Throughout the rest of this part of their arc, the brothers have several encounters with the Jedi, even killing several, though they do take some damage themselves. After narrowly escaping Kenobi and Hondo of all people, they begin stage 2 of Maul's plan, recruiting Death Watch following a chance encounter. After this, Maul goes on to recruit all of the major crime syndicates in the galaxy, including the Pikes, Black Sun, and the Hutts, in a shockingly short period of time. This amount of sudden power makes Maul one of the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, allowing him to conquer Mandalore, furthering his plan, as well as making him one of the most formidable villains in the show. At this point, Maul has been elevated beyond almost every other villain to appear in the show, taking an extreme amount of screen time and receiving quite a bit of special attention as he becomes a fan favorite. As one final act of revenge against Kenobi, Maul kills the Duchess of Mandalore, one of Kenobi's closest friends, revealing an ulterior motive for getting involved with that particular planet, and resolving one of his oldest storylines to the best of his ability, although unfortunately his hatred of Kenobi is an itch that cannot and will not be scratched, and will follow him to his grave. In many ways, his hatred of Kenobi is the solitary constant in his life, and in some ways could be viewed as necessary for his continued survival. Even when given the circumstances to kill Kenobi, he neglects to, almost as if having Kenobi dead would leave him without purpose, instead electing to prolong Obi-Wan's suffering.
Powerful than you know.
And those who oppose it are more powerful than you'll ever be. I know where you're from. I've been to your village. I know the decision to join the dark side wasn't yours. The Night Sisters made it for you.
Silence! You think you know me? It was I who languished for years, thinking of nothing but you. Nothing but this moment. And now, the perfect tool for my vengeance is in front of us. I never planned on killing you, but I will make you share my pain, Kenobi. I sense a presence. A presence I haven't felt since... Master.
I am most impressed to see you have survived your injuries.
I used your training, Master, and I have built all this in hopes of returning to your side.
How unfortunate that you are attempting to deceive me.
Master?
You have become a
Rival!
Unfortunately for our beloved antagonists, the brothers are now among the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and Savage's power is growing at an exponential rate in an extraordinarily short period of time. Maul himself is a worthy adversary to Dooku at this point, and it's only a matter of time before the two combined become powerful enough to threaten Palpatine himself. They are indeed powerful enough to change the course of the galaxy, and their combined arc is coming to an end. An interesting interview with Dave Filoni describes the impasse the writers were left with as they realized that someone had to die at the end of this arc, and unfortunately Savage took the fall. To this day, I have really mixed feelings about this episode. Sidious lands on Mandalore and effortlessly enters Maul's palace, attacking the brothers. Savage and Maul put up a really good fight, all things considered, but ultimately they get separated and Savage is killed. Maul is allowed to live in order to lead Palpatine to Mother Talzin, who is arguably more powerful than either brother individually, but the threat is resolved since Maul by himself will never be enough to fight Palpatine. I really hate this episode, but I also think it was done really well. The fact that Palpatine himself needs to come to stop the brothers reaffirms their strength and potential, and Savage's death humanizes the supposed monster in his final moments as the Night Sister corruption literally leaks out of his body and he apologizes for not being the apprentice Maul needed.
Brother, I am an unworthy apprentice. I'm not like you. I never was.
Maul's reaction to the loss of his brother is one final reminder of just how much depth Savage provided to Maul's character and how sincere their relationship was despite their evil nature. The episode does justice to both characters, but with that said, I do feel to a certain extent that the writers, enthusiastic at the idea of bringing back a prematurely killed off Zabrak Sith Lord, accidentally put yet another Zabrak Sith Lord in the same exact position they were retrieving Maul from. Savage had his arc cut short, and the way he was introduced in the show leaves very little room for any sort of earlier storytelling, leaving him in the same limbo Maul was before Clone Wars, except with no hope of a revival. And thus concludes Savage's arc, and this part of Maul's arc is also done. While that portion of Maul's arc is my favorite by far, he continues to grow as a character and maintains a similar level of quality into Season 7 of the Clone Wars. In between Savage's death in Season 7, Maul escapes capture and goes head-to-head versus Dooku and Grievous in a comic series that unfortunately was never made into a proper arc of the show. I actually want to make a video specifically about that arc since most people don't know about it, I think, so I'll hold off on getting into specifics for now. The next time we see Maul is in Season 7. Maul is still leading the criminal underworld, and at some point around this time, starts having intense visions of the future. An interesting pattern in Star Wars canon that I've noticed is that many characters that are connected to the Chosen One prophecy have visions of the future beyond what is normal for an average Sith or Jedi to have. Sifo Dyas, Dooku, Qui-Gon, Maul, Yoda, and obviously Anakin himself have all had extremely vivid visions of the future as the galaxy moves closer and closer to the pivotal events of Episode 3. Given Maul's knowledge of Palpatine's plans, he seems to comprehend what is about to happen and is attempting to get his army ready to claim as much power as possible amid the oncoming chaos, sensing both the rise of the Empire and Anakin's direct involvement. A lesser writing team would falter after killing off half of a duo like Clone Wars did, but this progression feels seamless for Maul, and he seems naturally driven forward by his constantly adapting goals. Maul had planned the siege of Mandalore to trap Anakin, apparently in a bid to stop Palpatine's plan from coming to fruition. But when the Jedi send Ahsoka instead, he seems to realize it's too late. The fascinating thing about this arc is how reasonable and completely correct Maul is about everything. Maul is not a good guy, but in this arc he isn't a villain either, at least not entirely. He tells Ahsoka the complete truth, and ultimately Ahsoka decides not to join him in stopping Palpatine. Not because Maul lies, but because the truth is too hard for her to believe. Matching Maul versus Ahsoka isn't something I ever would have thought of, but as the arc continues they meet in the middle, where they're forced to work together, and the two outcasts mirror each other to a surprising extent. Ahsoka wins the duel against Maul, possibly in part due to Maul's intentions being to recruit rather than kill, and Maul is captured but freed shortly after so that both Ahsoka and himself could escape Order 66. This marks the end of the Clone Wars era for everyone, including Maul, as he immediately goes missing for years.
Target number 2's in the hyperdrive room. hyperdrive generators are failing. Disengage. Disengage! It's too late!
Thankfully, this isn't the last we see of Maul, though there are clearly some significant gaps in his story. Maul has some spotty appearances as the leader of Crimson Dawn after Clone Wars, but ultimately isn't seen that much until he appears stranded on the Sith homeworld in Season 2 of Rebels. At this point, Maul no longer claims the title of Darth, having renounced the Sith completely, presumably after the death of his brother. Evidently, Maul has been evading the Empire for some time, pursuing the same goals he has had since we saw him in Clone Wars. Despite this, Maul's character has taken on a tragic tone, even more so than in the Clone Wars. Over the course of the show, Maul forms an unusual relationship with Ezra, attempting to replace Kanan as his master, and works with Ezra on a number of occasions, though he never makes it long without reminding both the audience and Ezra himself that ultimately the Sith have left too much of a permanent mark on him for him to be truly redeemable or trustworthy. In a particularly telling scene, as Ezra renounces the dark side once and for all, Maul makes it clear that he never fully recovered from the loss of his brother.
Converge on a planet with two suns. We can walk that path together as friends, as brothers.
Maul clings to his hatred of Kenobi desperately, perhaps recognizing in a strange way this consistent hatred is keeping him alive, much like it did in the cave all those years ago. Eventually, an unwitting Ezra leads Maul to Kenobi, and I absolutely cannot say enough good things about the episode Twin Suns. In the end, Maul's arc goes full circle, and there's nowhere to go but the beginning, to Tatooine and to Obi-Wan. As Maul and Kenobi face off for one final time, it becomes clear just how much Obi-Wan has grown, and just how stunted Maul's growth has been. Maul is unable to throw Obi-Wan off balance despite his taunts and threats, and as the conversation goes on, it becomes clear that Maul is desperately searching for the purpose and the hatred that will keep him going. His hatred of Kenobi and of the Sith has kept him going for his entire life, but the well is running dry. As Maul talks, he realizes that Obi-Wan is protecting someone in the desert, and Obi-Wan is forced to defend himself. The duel lasts a mere second, with Obi-Wan coming out the easy victor, but Obi-Wan drops to hold Maul as his lifelong rival takes his final breaths. Maul, finally free of his suffering and able to let go of the hatred that had been keeping him going, merely asks if Luke is the chosen one, and with his final breath says,
He will avenge us.
before dying. Not as a villain, but as a victim, in a bittersweet moment that leaves the audience surprisingly sympathetic once again to one of the franchise's cruelest villains. The scene is really interesting for a bunch of reasons, including the fact that Obi-Wan seemingly thinks Luke is the chosen one, which is an interesting idea I don't think most of the Star Wars fan base has really considered enough. But what's more relevant to this video is how in Maul's final moments, he unites with one of the most hated enemies he has had in his entire life, taking solace in the hope that Obi-Wan will train Luke to destroy the Emperor, his true enemy. Even Obi-Wan does not treat Maul as an enemy when he dies, despite everything Maul did to him. This episode is such an amazing piece of character development for both characters, and the most fitting end I can imagine to one of the best and most tragic story arcs in recent Star Wars history. Really, this marks the end of the most successful retcon in Star Wars history, and the end of a fan-favorite character's run. Dave Filoni and his team took a 2D action figure and fleshed him out into a thoughtful and nuanced character that represents everything modern Star Wars strives to achieve. With that said, I expect to see more of Maul in the future, considering the somewhat large gaps in his story between Clone Wars and Rebels. Unfortunately, Savage has no such gaps, but he brought so much to Maul's character, as well as just being cool on his own, that as much as I think it was a mistake, it's hard to complain too much with how he was treated. The best characters leave a mark on the franchise beyond just their personal arcs, and the Sith brothers truly brought something unique and valuable to Star Wars. Let me know what you thought of the video, and thanks for watching.